coming in on COVID-19 in India is increasingly getting better. And that has given great hope, especially ahead of the festive season. That's also, frankly, the big concern. As we continue to open up the economy, as the festive season is expected to bring more shoppers out or more people out onto the streets, the concern is that we may end up really reversing all the gains we've made. But before that, we need to take a close, hard look at the progress that we've made as well to understand if India has actually peaked in its battle with coronavirus pandemic. To speak to me on this now, I'm joined by Dr. Ashish Jha. He's the Dean of Brown University School of Public Health. Dr. Jha, thank you so much for speaking with ET Now and taking out the time to talk to us. I want your take on where India stands in its battle against coronavirus pandemic. Increasingly, the number of fresh active cases every day has been consistently falling from close to, say, about 90,000 a day a few weeks ago to now about 40,000 a day.
Yeah, so thank you for having me back on. So obviously that is good news that the number of cases have come down. And one of the main questions that I think we all have to ask ourselves is why? What has changed that is allowing the cases to come down? And I think some of it may be behavior change, some of it may be people being more careful, some of it may be policy. But I'm also worried that there are a couple of other factors. A lot of the tests we're using now are antigen tests. They're not as sensitive, so we're more likely to miss people. And of course, a lot of where the cases may be spreading are in rural areas, places like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, where testing availability is not as great as it is, of course, in the big cities like Mumbai or Delhi. So a combination of things make me think infections are coming down, good news, but we may also have some problems with testing in certain areas that may be giving us too much of a good news, that the number of infections may be worse than it appears.
And Dr. Jha, now the Indian government claims that India is testing much more than ever before, testing in larger numbers, and the tests are also more widespread. Do you take heart from that the number of tests being done is increasing every day? And at least that's the government data, that most of the new cases are restricted to certain states and districts. It seems to be less widespread than was earlier, thought of.
Yeah, so there's no doubt about it. India is doing more and more tests, actually probably doing more tests at this moment than any other country. Of course, India is a very large country, so on a per capita basis, it still has a long way to go to catch up to many other places. And given how large a country it is, I think India needs to be doing a lot more testing. But my concern about it is that a lot of these tests are, again, these new antigen tests, which I generally like, but they are less sensitive. They are going to miss many more cases. But also how widespread the testing is in terms of availability. Certainly in many places that when I'm speaking to people, even including my family who are in Bihar, I still hear lots of stories about the lack of availability of testing. So while national numbers are looking reasonably good, there are a lot of pockets in India where the testing availability is not as good as it needs to be.
Give me a sense, Dr. Jha, are antigen tests not being used as widely the world over? If you can just put it in context for us, because yes, it's true that we're using more antigen tests than the RT PCR, and antigen tests tend to have false negatives. Is that also a problem across the world, or is this now typical to India?
So there are other countries using antigen tests. Certainly in the United States, there are starting to be more antigen tests. But India's reliance on antigen tests is greater than almost any other country that I can think of. And now a majority of, or at least a large proportion of tests in India are antigen tests. That's not quite true here, for instance, in the US or in much of Europe, where RT PCR is still the primary approach. I do think that will change, by the way. I do think there are more antigen tests will become available here. But most countries are still primarily relying on RT PCR, whereas I think India has been one of the earliest to start relying on antigen tests. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing if it allows you to do more testing, but you have to remember that it has a higher false negative rate.
The other important factor that everyone looks at and thinks is the real key is the number of deaths, the mortality rate. Now, the case fatality rate in India is coming down. The latest number we have today is 1.51%, and that is seen as a really good sign. Overall, do you think that India has fared better than it was perceived earlier, say even in April, May, June? Considering the size of our population and the health infrastructure in place. I'm trying to get a sense from you, Dr. Jha, because the narrative here right now is that we've done really well as compared to the disaster that was expected. Do you think that that narrative sort of plays out?
So I do think India has done better than I was fearing it would, and so that's, of course, good news. In terms of number of deaths, India has a couple of advantages. I mean, one certainly has a young population. And so that helps a lot with this virus because we know that it is older and more chronically ill people who are more likely to die. But I also worry that we're missing a lot of deaths in India. And actually, in fact, in every country from Western Europe to the United States, we know that many, many deaths are missed because they are not counted. I suspect that is also happening in India. And maybe the last piece of caution is that, we've seen many countries where the cases have gone up, then they've come down. Much of Europe in April and May started having declining cases, and Europe thought that they were through the pandemic, that it was over. And then what we saw was a turnaround. And now, of course, Europe is having very, very large outbreaks, even worse in some places than what they had in April and May. So I do take heart that India is doing reasonably well, but I suspect there are many more deaths out there than we've accounted for. And we're not finished with this pandemic. We have a long way to go. And so I don't want anybody to celebrate yet. We have to remain vigilant.
Yeah. That's a message that Prime Minister Modi put out recently as well, and especially in light of the upcoming festive season. That's also the context that we're speaking in today. How concerning is the possibility of a spike in cases during the festive season? Is there any hope that people will be careful enough? Because more and more you go out in the streets here, you're possibly hearing this from family back home. People are not really being vigilant, to be honest. People are not being careful at all. And people are assuming that the worst is over, that it's all done.
Yeah, this is something that worries me quite a bit. And we've seen this in many, many places around the world. The holidays, festivals, they tend to lead to large spikes in cases 1 or 2 weeks after the set of events. And so when I think about India, and again, I agree from what I'm hearing from family. Of course, I haven't been able to come and visit, back again since the pandemic. But when I'm talking to family, I am hearing a lot of people think that the worst is behind us. We don't know if the worst is behind us or not. And what I would say is people really do have to remain careful during the festive season because there's a very serious risk of big spikes afterwards.
Let me talk to you about the vaccine as well, because Dr. Jha, you spoke about Bihar, your hometown, and a whole trend has begun from Bihar. The BJP announced that all vaccines will be free as part of its election manifesto. Since then, the states of Tamil Nadu and Madhya Pradesh have also announced free vaccines. What do you make of this announcement as part of public policy? First of all, should vaccinations and them being free or not be part of a political outreach? Number one. And secondly, do you think that it's feasible for India to give the vaccine free to all of its citizens? Because clearly you can't do this in one state and not in another.
Yeah, so 2 or 3 thoughts on this. First of all, I do think vaccines should be free. We should not. Certainly, there are many, many poor people in India who would not otherwise be able to afford it. And so I believe that all Indians should be able to get a vaccine, and it shouldn't cost them any money. I think that is very, very important. I don't believe this should be tied to a political party because we don't want people who are supporters of BJP or Congress or somebody else to see the vaccine favorably. But if you're on the opposite side, you see the vaccine as a political tool. That's bad. We want to get most of India vaccinated as quickly and safely as we can. And this should not be about which political party is in charge or what your affiliation is. And certainly this can't be about a single state or 3 or 4 states. It's got to be a national approach because people move across states. This virus is a global pandemic. All of India needs to be vaccinated. And the strategy should be based on how to get the vulnerable people vaccinated first, not which state are you in or who's running the central government or the state government.
Absolutely. Now, on the vaccine, we don't know when. There are so many different timelines. Someone says maybe early next year, someone says by March. The most vulnerable and priority sections of society will get it. It could take even longer for the whole population to be vaccinated. In the interim, do you think that the worst of the pandemic is behind us? I know it's a pretty glib, broad question, Dr. Jha, but frankly, it's the one that most viewers want to know. Is the worst behind us as far as coronavirus is concerned? And can we now figure out to relatively safely get on with our lives?
Yeah, so I wish I could say, yes, the worst is behind us. I think that would be a very dangerous view to have. There are many, many countries that after the first wave thought the worst was behind them and have now found themselves in a very bad second wave across much of Europe and many parts of the United States. So I would not be confident that the worst is behind us. If people are careful, if the government and state policymakers are smart and have really good policies in place, then yes, then we can get to a point where we don't have another 1 lakh cases a day happening. But that is really up to the people and the policymakers. If we are not careful, then the worst is absolutely not behind us.
And what about the vaccines? Once the vaccines come and are fairly widely available, do you think that that would, in a sense, put an end to the intensity of the pandemic?
Yeah, so I expect that the first generation of vaccines will be 70 or 80% effective. It will not be 95 or 100% effective. And of course, we have to make many billions of doses to get the whole world vaccinated. Okay. And so what I am saying to people is that once the vaccine starts becoming widely available, it will make a very big difference. It will definitely dramatically lower the intensity of the pandemic, but it won't make the pandemic go away. So we'll still have to do some things differently. I think we'll still have to be wearing face coverings in many places. We'll still have to have some amount of social distancing, careful about large crowds. But many parts of our lives will start returning back to normal. Once a lot of people have been vaccinated, timeline on that is very hard to predict. I'm hoping it will happen largely in 2021, but it depends, of course, on when vaccines are found to be safe and effective, and then how quickly we can make enough doses to get it out to the Indian people.
Well, the fingers are crossed. India is one of the largest producers of vaccines in the world. So there has to be an effective production level of vaccines for the whole world, really. Thank you so much, Dr. Jha, for speaking with us today.